This is Heritage Words, a podcast about the words we've inherited from our ancestors and the meaning they bring to our lives. Heritage Words is produced by the HUC Jewish Language Project, which raises awareness about Jewish ancestral diversity through the lens of language. I'm your host, Sarah Bunin Benor. Our guest today is Ariel Elias.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Our guest today is Ariel Elias. Ariel is a comedian living in New York City. She grew up in Kentucky and she is Jewish, and she made everybody laugh at her bat mitzvah, and the rest is history. Today, her comedy is a fun mesh of unique personal stories mixed with witty and wry observations. So I first came across Ariel when she made the news for a viral stand-up clip that involved someone throwing a beer can at her at a comedy event. And Jimmy Kimmel also noticed that clip and invited Ariel to make her late night television debut on Jimmy Kimmel Live. And then in 2024, she followed it up with an appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. So we are very lucky to have her here on our podcast today. And welcome to Heritage Words.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So I want to start by talking about your name, English name, Hebrew name, any other names. Tell us what they are and what they mean to you.
My name in English is the same as my name in Hebrew. It's Ariel, which I guess the full Hebrew name is Ariel Sarah Bat David Vanessa. That's the whole thing, but it means Lion of God, which I don't know that I ever really thought too much about. I am also a Leo, which is lion, so that's like a fun little coincidence. For me, when I was growing up, the biggest issue with my name was that when I was a year old, The Little Mermaid came out, and suddenly I also was a swimmer, which is double rough because I wasn't like that good. So people would be like, my coaches would be like, The Little Mermaid, huh? It's like, yeah, I don't know. But my middle name is Salika, which is Sephardi. It's Ladino, and it means messenger of the sun. And it was also my great grandmother's name. So that
How do you spell that, with an S or a C?
An S. It's Solika.
Beautiful. Okay, so Ladino is one of your ancestral languages. We'll get back to that in just a minute. So you grew up in Kentucky, you live in New York, and have in both of those places, have you been involved with Jewish communities?
Yes, but in very different ways. In Kentucky, growing up, the synagogue was the central hub of the Jewish community. There was also the temple because, like the old joke, wherever you are, there has to be two synagogues, the one you go to and the one you would never go to. But I went fairly frequently. It was such a small community. We didn't have a cantor. So when it was your bar or bat mitzvah year, the year before, you were going to lead the service. You were going to do the whole Friday night service, the whole Saturday morning service. The rabbi would be with you, but it's you. So we went to services the year before my bat mitzvah every single Friday night, every single Saturday morning to really learn it. And then after that, even in high school, I would still go and was part of youth group and all that stuff. Once I left, I think because that synagogue, that community was so tight-knit and such a big part of my upbringing, I had a really hard time finding anything else that felt quite like home the way that synagogue did. Because everywhere, especially in New York, it's much bigger, it's a lot less personal. At least that's how it felt to me. So my Jewish community in New York has never looked like that. My Jewish community in New York it's a lot of comedians, which is, it's a very Jewish career. It's also my neighbors. It's like it looks more like I'll bake a challah and give one to a neighbor, much more than just like going to services.
Got it. Got it. I think that's pretty common for people to not really participate in synagogue life in their, young adulthood and and sometimes when people have children, they start to participate in Jewish life again. Do you have children?
I don't have children.
Okay. And I love that you're part of the Jewish comedian scene. Have you actually done any Jewish comedy events?
Oh yeah, all the time. I perform at a lot of synagogues. I perform at JCCs. Um, I have done there have been a number of like Jewish shows organized by different comedians around New York, whether it's for Passover or like we do a Christmas show, but like a Jewish show on Christmas. Yeah, I've done a lot of Jewish themed shows.
That's great. I'd love to go to one sometime. I hope you come out to LA and do a show out here.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's turn now to your ancestors. Where were they from and when did they come to this country?
On my mom's side, they're Ashkenazi. They're from like your classic Russia, Lithuania, Austria, depending on where the border was at that time. My mom's grandparents were the ones who came over, I think on both sides, both her mom and her dad. So before the war, I think. On my dad's side, his mom was like Ashkenazi, like English is I think where they went at some point and then came to the US. His dad is Sephardic, his dad was Sephardic. And my dad's grandparents came over from Greece, where they went after they were expelled from Spain.
Do you,
So
do you know,
that's
was it Salonika or do you know where in Greece they
Mhm.
were from?
Yeah, it was Salonika and
Okay,
Castorius.
Castorius. Okay. And so your grandpa was the immigrant on that side from
No,
Greece?
my
Oh,
great grandfather
oh, your great grandfather. Okay.
and great grandmother.
Got it. So they came what, like in the 20s or something?
I think before then, I think they
Mhm.
came in the teens.
Okay.
So it's yeah, they've been there a while.
And how did your family end up in Kentucky?
Okay, so my dad is an English professor, and that's where he got a job. Both my parents were raised in New Jersey, and then they moved. My mom went to college in New York, my dad went to college in San Francisco. They were hippies, so they also lived in a van that traveled Mexico for 6 months and kind of lived all over. And then my dad got a job in Kentucky, and I think my mom thought that they would be there temporarily. And 36 years later, they're still there.
The classic academic story. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. It
they,
is. When I was growing up, I remember like there was the stereotype about Jews of like, they're business owners and da da da. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. All the Jews I know are professors.
well, they're also business owners, right? And my understanding is that Jews were very involved in the alcohol industry in Kentucky. Is that,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. Okay, so tell us about your connection to Ladino and Yiddish. I'm assuming your mom's side had Yiddish as their ancestral language. So tell
Yeah.
us about your connections to those languages.
My connection feels tenuous, I guess is the word. Like I remember my mom occasionally using Yiddish words. Like when I was being nosy, she would call me a yenta. My grandmother used it a lot more. My grandmother like spoke Yiddish. And later in her life, she had dementia and she would sometimes just slip into Yiddish, which she never did. Um, so my grandmother would use a little bit more with me, like shaina, maidele, all that stuff. But they never really spoke that much. It would just kind of come up occasionally. Um, my dad's side, so my grandfather, my dad's dad, spoke Ladino. And then I believe was like just really wanted to be American, quote unquote. So our last name went from Elias to Elias, and he did not speak Ladino to my dad and his brothers. So that is where that died. I do speak Spanish, and I remember when I was a teen, my dad and I and my brother were at the Jewish Museum in New York, and I saw a book that was written in Ladino. And I remember seeing it was written like Hebrew, but if I read it out, it sounded like Spanish. And that blew my mind. And I was like, oh, I could understand that. Like that's a language I didn't know I had. And I still don't have it, but I feel like I'm close to having it, which almost hurts.
Wow.
So
And so you just started reading that book in the museum and felt that you could understand some words?
yeah, definitely some words.
That's
Uh,
great. That's great.
yeah,
Well, it's not too late to learn Ladino, right?
I know. I kind of want to.
Well, that's a pretty common thing now. There's a Ladino learning boom that really picked up during the pandemic. A lot of young people started learning Ladino, whether it was part of their ancestry or not. And so there are online classes and websites you can look at.
Do you speak Ladino?
A little bit. I studied Spanish in college, and then when I got into Jewish languages, I started learning a little Ladino. I studied it in Jerusalem a bit, and so yeah, I can read and understand a bit, and mostly I know a lot of Ladino heritage words, which is what I want to turn to now. So what are some of the words that came down to you through the generations from your dad's side?
I mean, none. Like
None.
there, none. My grandfather died before I was born, and I had no Ladino words at all. I don't think. Like it's possible you'll say a word and I'll be like, oh, I didn't even know that that was Ladino, but I not that I'm aware of now.
So yeah, in the Ladino, in the Sephardic community in Seattle, a lot of Ladino words were maintained. And there, the community is more from Rhodes and Turkey than from Salonika. But because it's such a tight-knit Sephardic community there, they actually did maintain a lot of Ladino words. So, for example, echar lashon means to hang out, to shoot the breeze. It literally means to throw language. Um,
That makes sense. Because like
yeah.
echad means to do, right? And I remember
Uh-huh.
all I remember from I remember we had to do like a commandment project in Hebrew school or Sunday school, and
Uh-huh.
the commandment I was assigned was lashon hara, which is
Uh-huh.
like don't speak, like no, don't gossip, which is very funny because it sounds like in the Ladino community in Seattle, this is the exact opposite. This is like come gossip.
Right. It's not Lashon Hara, it's Lashon HaTov, or the good language, but really it's just to throw around language, to do language. Let's see some other words there. Añada Buena, which means Happy New Year.
Yeah.
And there's Bavajadas, which is nonsense.
Hmm.
There's, let's see, what are some other words? Well, a lot of the food words. And what about your family? Does your family maintain any Sephardic foods?
No, it's a real bummer. No, we'll have an orange on the Seder plate, but that's kind of about it. My dad doesn't really cook, and neither did any of I don't think his brothers did either. So it really just like died there,
Well,
that
the orange
tradition.
on the Seder plate is actually an American innovation.
Really?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with Sephardim.
Uh, I got nothing then.
Okay. Um, so that's pretty common, I think, for a lot of families. They just kind of have no words from their ancestral languages. And in fact, one of the people that we've previously interviewed on this podcast had a similar situation, half Ashkenazi, half Sephardi, and kind of grew up with some Yiddish words, not really any Ladino words, but she has learned Ladino and picked up some Ladino heritage words and started using them with her kids. And now in their house, I remember one of the phrases that they use often in their house is a phrase that you say when someone sneezes. And here, I'll read it so I don't mess it up. Vivas, crescas, and florezcas, which is, I mean, it literally means live, grow, and flourish. And it's something you say instead of gesundheit or bless you.
I love that. I mean, it rhymes. It sounds fun. I like
Yeah.
that a lot.
Okay, so let's talk about Hebrew. Did you talked about having had a bat mitzvah? What was your experience like learning Hebrew?
You know, it was like you learn how to read it so you can read the prayer book, but then not a lot of like learning what it actually means. Pretty rudimentary, like little basic words here and there. And then when I went to college, I took Hebrew 101 because I was like, well, I want to learn how to like speak this conversationally. And I hated the professor. And then I found out he was teaching the next level, which he hadn't before, and was like gonna move on to the next level. And I was like, well, I think this is where my learning Hebrew ends, unfortunately. But I remember a lot of time in Hebrew school when we would do translations, I would, because I was also learning Spanish, I would get them mixed up all the time. Um, so, you know, I can say like, where are the bathrooms? What is this?
And
And I know the prayers.
you know the prayers and you can read the alphabet, so you were
Yeah,
able
Fingerhut.
to identify that Ladino in the museum. That's neat. Okay, so then what about the wait, I lost my train of thought. Oh, huh. You said something about Hebrew school. I'm trying to remember what I was gonna say. Okay, so tell us about Passover in your home. Do you go through the Haggadah and recite it in Hebrew or English or some other language?
Both. We do it in both. You know, it's mostly English, but we do both. Passover was always my favorite holiday. I do love the ritual of it. I think I have some anxiety and OCD tendencies, especially around food. And I don't know if Passover helped that or created that, but I um, I always loved like, you know, it's like a storytelling around the dinner table. It's also the one holiday where it's like you're doing a lot of it that's very traditional, but it still feels accessible. So like we would invite people who weren't Jewish to come to our Seder and be like, do you want to experience a little bit of what we do? And my mom would cook for way too long and she would use every dish, every special dish. It would take us hours afterwards to do the dishes and clean. But we we go through the Haggadah, and my dad like quote unquote leads. Everybody takes a turn, right? We all read. We kind of go down the line. There's also everybody just will ask questions. People make comments. We started like I think this happens anytime you tell the same story over and over again, but like, you know, especially as the wine is flowing, you get kind of punchy and you start punching up the story and making little comments. So it was it was that and then I'd say in the last 10 years it's become much more like you do the first half of the Seder, you eat the meal, and then skip to the third, fourth glass of wine, and then we're done.
So
Everybody
not a
just
lot,
gets really sleepy.
so not a lot of singing.
There's some singing. It depends on who's at the Seder. We had some family friends who we would often do Seder with who they're like incredible singers and one of them would work as the gabbai a lot during services and he would sing and it was like incredible. You know, we did Diana, the classics.
Okay. Well, at my Seder, we do some songs in Yiddish and Ladino in addition to the Hebrew and
Oh,
English.
cool.
Yeah. So at your Seders, when you had non-Jewish guests, did you translate for them, or did you feel like you changed the way you spoke because there were non-Jewish guests there?
I don't know. I feel like there were always non-Jewish guests there. I don't know that and they would rotate. It wasn't always the same ones. So I don't know that we necessarily did something different. The whole story we would do in English. The things that we would do in Hebrew were the prayers, right? Like any like the and the four questions. But we would always do by default, we would always do it also in English. Like we would say it in English afterwards. And I
Mhm.
don't know that that was necessarily for our non-Jewish guests.
Yeah.
Like my mom speaks just as much Hebrew as those non-Jewish guests, like, uh, so, but it was, I mean, I think like the nature of Seder is to be inclusive, right? Like the whole message is like, let all who are hungry come and eat. You were once a stranger. You know what it's like to be a stranger in land. So welcome people with open arms.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to turn now to your experience as a Jew growing up in Kentucky with very few other Jews. You talk about this in your comedy routine. And can you just tell us what that experience was like? Did you go to public school?
Yeah, I went to public school.
Yeah, tell us about your experiences.
So when I was in elementary school, there were two other Jews in my class, and then by the time I was in high school, it was just me and one other girl. She went to the temple, I went to the synagogue, mortal enemies. Uh, but it was, I guess at times it was like very difficult and isolating, but mostly what I took from that experience is that like generally people are curious and want to know about people who are different from them. I think it's really easy to look at the world and say like, oh, people are so close-minded, people are so scared, anybody who's different. And my experience is when you're actually in your community, people are fascinated by somebody who's different. And I'm very grateful for that. I also went to a school that was majority Black, and I think that helped a lot in that we were all othered in many ways. And in that way, we were able to like bond a little bit over it or like feel more permission to ask each other about like what's this like what each other's cultures are like, what each other's foods are like in a way that I don't know that it would have been so easy in a more like traditional school.
Yeah. And did you ever talk about the holidays with your non-Jewish friends?
Yeah, otherwise I wouldn't have talked about them at all. I, you
Good
know,
point.
I had like my Hebrew school class, there were 9 of us and none of them went to my school.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's also like it's such a different experience being here in New York where and I think this is a great thing, but like every holiday for any culture, like you get off school. Um, Whereas like when I was growing up, like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we never that, it would be like you went back to school and then 2 weeks later I would be absent. And inevitably people would be like, where were you? And I was like, oh, it was our new year. And they're like, it's September. And so you end up having to explain the lunar calendar and what our new year is and how it's 2 days. So yeah, there was and then there would be, the week in the spring where suddenly I wasn't bringing sandwiches to school anymore. I was bringing matzah and what's that? So yeah, I remember one year, this is one of my favorite memories of, I'm sorry, my dog's here. Um, I remember one year, I must have been like 16 or 17 because I had my license. I went ice skating with a bunch of friends. Uh, it was during Hanukkah. And this is with like these were my friends who didn't even go to my school. They went to like a school in the country, like in the middle of nowhere. And I remember we finished ice skating. We were all hungry. And I was like, I think my mom's making latkes. Do you guys all want to come over? And I called my mom and I said, hey, is it okay? And she was thrilled. She loved hosting. She loved like showing all of my friends Judaism stuff. And so a bunch of like 5 or 6 of us went over to my house. My mom fried up a bunch of latkes for them, and they're eating them. And she's just like, who would have thought in the middle of Kentucky, like this is what these kids would be eating?
Wow. So you're sort of an ambassador of Judaism, and you're also sharing Jewish language with them, right? You're speaking English, but Jewish English. You're talking about latkes and matzah and using words
Right.
from Yiddish and Hebrew. So you probably were the first person to introduce some of your friends to those words.
Yeah, for sure.
And then also in your comedy routine, you talk about your name, Ariel.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process of coming up with those jokes about your name?
So the main joke, I'm guessing, is the Earl joke, which is I say Jews pronounce my name one way, which is Ariel. Spanish people pronounce it Ariel, but in Kentucky they say it Earl. Which so that's a real thing. My best friend's dad, he's from Appalachia and he speaks like he's got marbles in the back of his throat. That's his accent. There's also like a million Kentucky accents. It's not just like a twang. There's so many different ones, and that was his. And I would go over to my friend's house, and he just be like, "Hey, Earl." And my friend, his daughter goes, "Why do you call her Earl?" And he goes, "That's her name, isn't it?" And so it just became like I was Earl. And then I didn't think that much about it. And I was sitting at a comedy club. I was watching another comedian, and he just said the word Earl. And I remember like, oh, that was my nickname. And then I was like, rule of threes, right? That's like a huge thing in jokes, is rule of threes. And so I was like, some people said it Ariel, some people said it Ariel, and then some people said it Earl. And I was like, there it is. So that joke actually just showed up fully formed, which is so rare.
Mm.
Um, and then my friend's dad, who called me Earl, he came to a show once. I was doing shows back in Kentucky, and afterwards he came over to me and I said, I wrote that Earl joke for you, right? And he said, I have a feeling you wrote a few of those jokes for me.
Wow. And you also make a joke about Ariel Sharon. Um,
Mhm.
so did that come up at all when you were growing up? Like saying that's how you pronounce my name, like Ariel Sharon?
No. No, that's a lie. That was one of the first jokes I wrote that I liked. Um, I just remember as a kid, I read the newspaper because I didn't have a ton of friends, and Ariel Sharon was the prime minister at the time, so it would come up a lot, and I was like, oh, that's the only other time I've ever seen my name besides The Little Mermaid, right? Like my name
Mhm.
is not common enough that when you would go and like buy the nameplates at like a souvenir shop, like my name was never on there. So the only other representation I had for other Ariels was The Little Mermaid and Ariel Sharon. So that's how I wrote
Well,
that.
even just now you pronounced your name differently. You sort of said Ariel and then Ariel. So are you conscious of that going back and forth in the vowel
You
at
are,
the
you really are a linguist. You're like, I know this.
beginning?
So yeah, so my parents say it Ariel, which I have learned is basically just like a New Jersey accent.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is really hard for people in Kentucky to say.
Mm.
When people would ask me, how do you pronounce it? And for a long time, I said, it's Ariel. And they couldn't do it. And then I would try to say, it's A like an apple. But then they would go, Ariel. And I was like, this is exhausting. So it got to a point where I was like, I actually don't care how you pronounce it as long as it's close. I know it's difficult. So just whatever feels the most natural for you. So most of my friends would say Ariel, or Ariel.
Mhm.
Occasionally I would get Ariel, but that really is like a more, I don't know if like Jewish pronunciation is right, but you could probably tell me who says Ariel more. Um, and it does come up when I still get asked like, how do you pronounce it? My husband gets very frustrated with me because I'm like, I don't care, say it however you want. And he's like, you need to just tell people. And I was like, no, I can't, because when I do, it becomes an hour of them practicing,
Mm,
and I just don't care enough. As
yeah.
long as you're getting
But
close.
but you don't want people to call you Earl,
You can call
or
me
you're
Earl.
okay. You can
Yeah,
call it.
call me
Call
Earl.
you.
I have stickers that I sell on the road that say Earl.
Yeah, so yes, the pronunciation Ariel is more common among Jews who are highly engaged in Jewish life, especially Orthodox Jews, modern Orthodox Jews. But actually, it's more likely to be a boy's name in Orthodox communities than a girl's name. But since The Little Mermaid came out, I think people are much more familiar with the name Ariel. And I think that has become more common even in the Jewish community as a pronunciation. And yes, the Ariel is a New York, New Jersey kind of thing. And it's actually, that was an issue in my family too. My brother's named Aaron, and my parents had both spent some time in New York. And I think one of my parents wanted to pronounce it Aaron and one Aaron. Aaron won out because we grew up in
Hmm.
Maryland, and that's, what people said, no one's going to say Aaron there. But it's interesting that you're talking about New York, New Jersey pronunciations, because one thing we've found is that Jews outside of New York, the New York area, are more likely to have New York influences in their language than non-Jews outside of New York.
That makes
And
sense.
so you are bringing New York language to Kentucky in interesting ways.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the video of the guys in Baltimore pronouncing they get a sentence it's a Aaron earned an iron earn, and
No, I haven't seen
they all go earn and earn.
that. I'll check that out. Wow, that's great. And we'll post a link to that at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question based on your comedy routine. You talked about your dad being from Spain. I'm pretty sure
Hmm.
that's what you said.
Yeah.
So tell us about your decision to say that rather than explaining the whole thing of Salonica and Sephardim.
Economy of words in comedy is very important, especially in New York comedy. You get most at open mics, you get 2 to 3 minutes. And then once you're doing showcases, you get 15, 20 minutes tops. So you have to be concise. And am I really going to sit here and say, due to the diaspora, my family originally was Spain, and then they went to Greece, and but they were within their own Sephardic community. And then it's like it's just too exhausting. Also, I think if you asked my dad, like, where did you guys consider yourselves from? I don't know that they would say Greece, even though they haven't been in Spain since the 1400s. um I think they would have a hard time identifying themselves. They identified as Sephardic. So the other thing is that my dad, brother, and I all have Spanish citizenship because of the law that Spain has, where for a time there was a window where if you could prove that your ancestors were kicked out during the Inquisition, you could qualify. And so, like, we have Spanish citizenship, we don't have Greek citizenship. So if you ask, like, where do I feel my heritage is tied to me, it feels more Spanish than Greek.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's really common for Sephardic Jews to feel a major connection to Spain, not just because their family was from there, but I think partly because of Ladino, because Ladino is
Hmm.
Judeo-Spanish, and they feel that connection also through the music and even some of the foods that were popular in Greece and Turkey. Okay, so how did you make that decision to get Spanish citizenship?
My mom made me. She had been pushing for it for a little while of like, you should really do this. And I was like, I don't really see the point. And then in 2016, when Trump got elected, I was like, okay, I think I see the point. And so we all did it. And then we took a family trip to Spain to sign some paperwork, but also seeing my dad there. My dad is a very like he's an incredibly thoughtful, smart man, but he does not share a lot of feelings, and he's very stoic, I think is a good way to describe him. Or he portrays himself as very stoic. I actually think he feels a lot. Um, but when we were in Spain, he was clearly very moved by not just him being there, but having us there. And I don't think I realized how much it meant to him, but it makes sense because it's like he knew the people who came to the US, right? Like he knew my great grandparents, and he heard Ladino spoken. So I think for him it felt like such a returning, not just for him, but like for future generations of his own family. And I think like as much as I feel slighted by not getting to speak Ladino, I think he feels it even more because he was around it.
Hmm.
Uh, so that even though I didn't necessarily make such a conscious decision to pursue citizenship, and at the time it just sort of felt like, my joke about it was like, it just kind of feels like a backup plan. And I think that's important. Once we actually got there, I was like, no, this is important for my family. Like this is like this is where we're from.
Hmm. And so did you learn Spanish in elementary school, middle school? How did you learn Spanish?
Yeah, I was in a Spanish immersion program, first through
Oh,
12th
wow.
grade, and then I have my degree in it, actually.
Oh, okay. So you really know Spanish.
Yeah, it's not so much anymore, honestly. Since I moved to New York, I don't use it very much. Right after I graduated college, I worked as a translator for a little while in a community health center. And I like at that point I was like very fluent. Now I can understand it, but it's hard to speak it. I
Hmm.
think if I went somewhere, it would come back, but
Yeah. Well, when you were in Spain, were you able to get around with your
yeah,
Spanish?
yes.
And you figured out that, well, was the Spanish you learned in your immersion program Latin American or
Hmm.
Spanish?
Yeah, it was Latin American. All of the teachers, the Spanish teachers were native speakers. But I didn't have a Spanish teacher until middle school, I think. And then I was like, I can't understand this guy. This accent's crazy.
So you had already been exposed to Iberian Spanish when you went to Spain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but not much. That Spanish is very difficult for me to understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It takes a while.
Yeah. And not just the pronunciation, but some words and grammatical things are a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so then you talk about the getting your citizenship in your comedy routine. You also, it's obviously in English, and you have to make decisions when you're bringing up a concept that's relevant to Judaism, if you're going to use the Hebrew word or Yiddish word or Sephardic or whatever versus English. And sometimes you do use some Hebrew words. How do you make those decisions?
I don't know that I'm making it consciously. Um, Usually it's just the word that I'm most familiar with. And I do have built in a lot of times if I use a particular, like I have a joke about like having a mezuzah, and I take a moment to explain what a mezuzah is, and it's because it's part of the punchline. I mean, it is the punchline, but I I think because I grew up, as you said, the quote unquote ambassador of Judaism, I think I have it pretty ingrained in me to try to explain, to use the word, but then explain what it means. And that might also be because my dad's a teacher.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, that's actually something that I used to do an assignment in one of my classes where the students interviewed comedians about
Mhm.
their language. And one of the questions was, do they see their comedy as pedagogical in addition to entertaining? And so I'll ask you that. Do you feel like what you're doing is not just entertaining, but also educating?
Yes, but as a byproduct, not the product. Um, I think the first primary goal of comedy is to be funny. Um, and then I think I think a big part of comedy also is showing your perspective and your worldview. Because if you're just up there telling like joke with no perspective, it gets really boring. You can't listen to 45 minutes of that. And it's also like, what's the point of this? Why bother? And I think that inherently in showing your perspective and in showing your worldview, you will inevitably end up being educational, right? Like it's also like some of the source of comedy and of jokes themselves whenever you're feeling stuck, it's like watch a documentary because a lot of things that happen in real life are insane and then it becomes impossible not to write a joke about it. And so
Hmm.
then you're just like sharing. Like comedy is sharing. So how can sharing not be educational?
Hmm. It's a really good point. And some of that education involves some language, talking about
Yeah.
language or using language and defining it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so, and you, when your dog walked by, I was wondering, what's your dog's name?
Her name's Bobby.
Bobby?
Yeah, it's short for Baba Ganoush, actually.
Oh, that's right. I felt like there was some, did you have that in one of your routines, maybe?
I don't think so. I'm sure I've talked about it before because if you give me an opportunity to talk about my dog, I'm gonna fucking talk about my dog.
Okay, tell us about it. Tell us about your dog.
Well, so our last dog was named Bamford, named for Maria Bamford. But we actually live in a very Greek neighborhood, and our Greek neighbors had a really hard time with the name Bamford. And as somebody who grew up with a name that people had a hard time pronouncing, I wanted to make sure when we had the next dog that we had a name that they could they could pronounce and they could enjoy her more thoroughly. So my husband and I were pitching names and I love a food name for a dog so much. And he said we were just saying about I think we might have been like looking at a menu and saw Baba Ganoush and he was like, how about that? Bobby for short. And there it is.
Love it. And I also have done research on Jewish names of pets. And after human names, food names are one of the most common types of names of Jewish names of pets. And yeah, I think there
Mhm.
are other dogs named Baba Ganoush. But it's interesting that you chose to call the dog Bobby for short. Uh, and that's kind of similar to what you do in your comedy, right? You have there's different layers, you have the way you would talk about it with someone, and then the way you would talk about it with the public that doesn't have any connection to Judaism. And it's kind of like that with your dog's name.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a fun parallel you noticed. I don't think it's intentional, but yeah, definitely.
But it's also pretty common to have a name of a dog and then have a nickname that's different. That's like, for
Wow.
example, actually a Sephardic dog named Boreka, and the nickname is Bo, which is
Hmm.
actually a funny name for a dog because it also means come. So yeah,
Yeah. I mean, we have a million nicknames for her. It's like Bob, Bobby Girl, Bobo. But yeah, just any variation on Bobby.
nice. So we're almost out of time, but I want to make sure you have time to tell us any other thoughts you have about your ancestral languages, identities, communities.
I mean, I guess I wish I had more. Like, I guess I never like questioned at all, like, am I Sephardic? And I still don't, but it does make me very sad that I don't have these pieces of it that like can't get that back. I mean, I can learn the language, but that will never be part of my childhood in the same way. And I think I feel like we're returning to it a bit, unfortunately, of this cultural shift in defining what it is to be American in a very narrow way. And I think my grandfather was the victim of that, in that he felt so much pressure to fit in this way. And I hope that we don't make the mistake for the next generations.
Amen. Wow, thank you. And you talked about sharing in your comedy your perspective and educating in that way of sort of sharing perspectives, and you've done that in this interview today. So thank you so much, Ariel Elias, or Earl Elias, for sharing all that with us and for all that you do to entertain and make the world a better place.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for having me. This is cool. This is a cool thing you're doing.
Thank you. Heritage Words is a partnership of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Language Project and HUC Connect, supported by tax-deductible donations from listeners like you. I'm the producer and host, Sarah Bunin Benor. Kyle Elbaz Fingerhut is assistant producer, Avishay Artsy is editor, and Talia Ehrenberg is video editor. The music is from Maurice El Medioni's French and Algerian Arabic album Café Oran, featuring the Klezmatics David Krakauer and Frank London, courtesy of Piranha Records. This podcast is one of the many ways the Jewish Language Project raises awareness about the diversity of the Jewish people and the phenomenon of heritage words. We also have online crowdsourced dictionaries where you can find the words mentioned on the podcast. We post Jewish Word of the Week and fun facts on social media, and we offer free educational materials and exhibits that you can visit online or display in a synagogue, museum, or community center. Contact us about our live taping opportunities. Looking for gifts for Shabbat dinners and Passover seders? Check out our whimsical multilingual t-shirts, tote bags, stickers, and aprons. You can find all this content and donate, volunteer, or sign up for our email list at jewishlanguages.org. Thank you, merci mucho, soch boshi, rahmat, shukran, toda rabah, ashenem dank.